Hi, my name is Paul Santiolo, W1VLF. I work here at the ARRL, and today we're going to be building the Introduction to Radio Receiver Kit by the ARRL. And we'll take a look at this. This is what it looks like. But before we really get started, I want to talk about a couple things like safety. So why are we so interested in safety when we're building such a small kit? Well, we will be soldering today, and depending on the type of solder that you have, there are lead-free solders and there are leaded solders. And if you take a look at this roll here, you'll see that this is 60-40 solder, so it's 60% lead. And you want to make sure two really important things. One is you wash your hands as best you can afterwards. You don't inhale the smoke. And then this is probably the one I should have started with first, the safety glasses. This iron is going to get very, very warm, and it's going to be able to melt this metal. So safety is a primary concern here. So now that we've got our safety glasses on, and we have a couple of pairs of tools here, snips, and then needle nose pliers that we will use to bend the leads to fit into our circuit board. The one caution here is that these snips can shoot a piece of wire off, and so you're going to want to take that piece of wire and hold it with your hand as you snip it, and you have the piece left in your hand, and then you discard it. These can fly many, many feet if you're not careful. Okay, so we've got safety out of the way, so what's in this package? Let's open it up and see what our kit of parts looks like. Okay, we've got a small layout here in color of where the parts go. And you'll see that represented right here as well. So we'll just set that off to the side for now. The main part of this kit is the circuit board. Give you a little bit better look at that. And each component lays in its respective place, and it's going to be called out on the called out as a part number here: resistor 1, 2, 3, capacitor 1, 2, 3, etc. And then you'll be able to look it up on your parts list over here. Got a battery. We're going to need headphones to listen to this afterwards, so we got a little pair of earbuds, the battery clip, and a whole mess of other parts that we're going to need to identify and solder in place to make this work. And then also, very important here, is we have a small screwdriver that we'll use to actually tune the station once we have the kit underway, actually built and operating. So the first thing we want to do is we want to try to look at these components that are on the sheet, and we want to identify them. So we verified that all the larger parts are in the kit. Now let's take a look at some of the resistors. The first one here, R1, okay, R1 is a 3-pin variable resistor. That's going to be our volume control. So we know that's there. And if you're doing this you can put a little check mark in the side here to make sure that you really have it. I'll just set the part over here for now. So the next one is going to be R2, and there are two R2s, okay, R2 and 3 actually, and those are 10 mega ohm resistors. And if you look to the right here a little bit, you're going to see that this resistor should read brown, black, and blue. So if you're not familiar with the resistor color code, it's easy enough to identify that resistor by the brown, black, and blue. So let's see. I think I have both of them right here. Okay, brown, black, and blue. Now, resistors, such as these, do not need to be polarized. What do I mean by polarized? They don't have a direction. They can go in this way or this way. Later, when we get to some of the capacitors, we'll take a closer look at the capacitor. These are going to definitely have to go in a very specific direction. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's call out these two resistors again. Remember, we're on R2 here, brown, black, and blue. So we've got those. You'll put your check mark in the box. The next resistor we want is 100K, and that would be brown, black, yellow. Again, easy to identify by the colors. And let's see, where is our 100K resistor? And oh, here it is. Okay. All right, these resistors all look the same, but they're all different in value. So we found that. You'll put your check mark in. So let's go down to our 3.3K. And again, there's two of those, R5 and R6. Okay, and what's those? Orange, orange, red. Not too many resistors left, so the choices are getting smaller and smaller. Okay, so here's our two resistors. You can see both of these are exactly the same. They don't have to go into the circuit board in any specific direction. Put those aside. What else do we have here now? We have the 100 ohm R7 resistor, so that's going to be brown, brown, black. There's our brown, brown, black resistor. Let me let you focus in there a little bit on it, okay? Put that off to the side. And I think we're done resistors. So now we want to go to C1 and C2. Or excuse me, C1 is a 10 microfarad capacitor. Now, if you look here, I don't know if you can see this that well, but let me bring this up here for you. If you look here, after we focus, anything with a star on it on this picture indicates that that part needs to go in a very specific direction. Okay, now unlike the resistors, which we just talked about, those can go in either way, but the capacitors, they need to go in a specific direction. Let's talk about that capacitor for a second. If you look at it, there's a black line on that capacitor, and that black line has a dash in it, and that dash indicates that that's the negative side of the capacitor. And I'll talk again about that just a little bit more when we actually go to place that part. So let's go back to our data sheet here, our sheet. C1 is a 10 microfarad capacitor. So let's take a look. Those are physically written on the capacitors. And this one looks like a 50, this is the 10 microfarad capacitor right here. It's a little tough under the lights. Nope, that's a 1 microfarad. So let's see what we have here. Okay, here's the 10 microfarad capacitor. I'm going to try to hold that up so you can actually see the value written on there. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, great. So let's put that aside. The next capacitor, and you'll be checking all these off and going through all the different pieces. So I'm going to let you folks do that, get that all squared away, and once you've got all your parts, you know everything is there, then we can come back and we'll start building. Okay, so now the real fun starts. We're actually going to start placing components on our board, and let's start off with a big component. This is the circuit board up close so you can see it, and the earbud piece. Typically, when you're beginning soldering, it's much easier to solder these larger connections than it is to solder the very small ones in the middle here. So let's start by placing the earbud connector in there, and we'll solder that one in place. Okay. Now that I have the earbud connector in place, I'm going to fold these over just slightly to hold it, the pins, just slightly over to hold it in place while I do my soldering iron. And we won't have to cut any of these off. One more thing about a couple more things about soldering. It's not very convenient to use a large roll like this, so I'll just cut off a couple of feet and I'll use this very, very easy to handle small piece of solder. And before every connection, if you'll notice, that soldering iron is not very shiny, but it is now. Okay? And we tin our soldering iron every time we go to make a solder connection. So soldering iron comes out, it gets cleaned, it gets tinned, and then we go to our solder connection. So right here, and a quick note, heat goes on one side, solder goes on the other side of the joint, and the solder draws to the connection. All right, I'll do these three real quick, and then we'll take a closer look at them. Okay, so let's see what we have. Okay, you're going to see someone had described it to me as these as Hershey Kisses. And that's really what they look like, nice and smooth. There's no jagged edges. Okay, so you're going to notice when you solder that the solder flows. It's an actual action that takes place. You heat up the component, the board and the component, and the solder will rush in to fill that void. All right, let's move on to the next piece. I think what we're going to do is we're going to use the on-off switch. So you can see that in the upper corner here of the diagram. Let's put that in. Okay. And we have 3 pins sticking out. All right, and we're going to solder those in place. Again, each time I remove the soldering iron, I clean it, tin it, and solder it. Okay, and before I put it back, I clean it again. Good soldering is necessary to have a very clean soldering iron tip. So now we've got those 2 in. Let's see, what else is physically big that we could put in? Let's put in the volume control, which is R1. Okay, that's the blue component that we looked at first on. It has 3 legs. We'll snap it in position here. There's only one way that these can go in, because there's 3 legs and one of them is offset. If I can see it. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, now that piece won't fall out. Let's solder again. Oh, wait a minute. Clean, tin, and solder. Okay. Clean it again and put it back. So let's take a quick look at this to inspect it to make sure that these solder connections are okay. They all look pretty good to me. All right, so now we can move on to something that's a little bit more challenging. Let's take one of the resistors, for instance. Let's grab our sheet. It's upside down for me, but for you, now it's right side up. So the 2 10 meg ohm resistors, remember those? Those are the ones with the blue bands. So we're going to grab both of those, set them aside here. Okay. And then take our needle nose. Let's look at where this has to go. These are going to be R2 and R3. So R2 and R3 need to go, here's R2. And obviously we're not going to just stick it in there and leave that wire hanging up like that. So we're going to fold these into a position with our needle nose. Let's do that. Okay, fold it over. Fold it over. And then we'll insert that part into the R2 holes. Okay. Part lays pretty flat down on the circuit board there. And then we have our wires sticking up. So let's solder those now. Clean, tin, and solder. Okay. Now, my camera operator is wondering if I'm going to fire one of these leads off at him, but we're not going to. We're going to hold on to that lead, and we're going to cut it right near the circuit board. And I still have the lead in my hand. I'm going to discard it over here. Otherwise, it would rocket across the room, and we don't want that. All right, so where's our other R2? Our R3. Looking on the board, we see, where's that hiding? Anybody see that? These old eyes. Okay, there's R3, right there. Let's take our needle nose, fold apart. Again, gently. Okay, and we'll place that in. It could be a little difficult sometimes because the holes are extremely small, but once you get the part leads set up properly, it'll fit right in nicely. So we fold those off to the side slightly to keep the part in place so it's not going to fall out on us. Okay, clean, tin, and solder. Okay. And then again, we're going we're going to snip off the piece, but we're going to hold on to that wire so that it doesn't go flying into our friends in the audience here. All right. Starting to take shape. If the camera focuses for us. There we go. Okay, so you can see how we're filling in the holes. All right, so the next component we want to put in is R4. That's the 100K. That's going to have a yellow band. We identified this before. Let's do the same thing. Okay, R4. Where's R4 located? Okay, there it is. Place that part in, one hole at a time. Press it down to the surface. And then again, we just pull these out a little bit, fold them out just slightly so the part won't fall out. And then we go to solder. It's important to clean the tip and tin it each time if you want to learn to solder well. That's why I keep saying it. So we clean, we tin, and we solder. Okay? Good. And again, this is why we have our safety glasses on. All right. Okay, so what's next? Let's follow that down, R4. R5 and R6 are the same, and those are the 3.3K resistors, so we're looking for orange, orange, and red, and that's these two guys right here. Okay, orange, orange, and red. And those are R5 and R6. So these should be a little easier to find where they go because we're getting less and less parts. The holes are beginning to get filled up, and it's actually starting to look like something. Okay, we're going to tin, clean, and tin, and then we're going to solder. Notice how long it takes me to make that solder connection? Only a half of a second. If you have a clean iron and you've recently tinned it and you apply the heat properly, it takes only a half a second. If I was putting my soldering iron on here for waiting and waiting and waiting, there's something wrong. We need to make sure that we get a correct transfer heat. So let's clean it again, re-tin, and then we'll go right in here. Okay. All right, we're going to get rid of those parts. Okay, we're back. Let's. We have one more of the 3.3K resistors. That would be R4 and R5 and R6, and we're putting in R6 now. And one more resistor after that, and then we're going to move on to the capacitors. So I'll just fold these leads up, and we'll get R6 in place. Okay. See that? Clean. Let's tin and solder. See? A half a second is all it takes to make a good solder connection. Okay, that one took almost a whole second. All right. And we'll make sure that these don't fly off and hit my friend Chris. Okay. And we have one resistor left, it looks like, and that must be R7. Brown, black, brown. Let's take a look. Brown, black, brown. There it is. Okay? All right. So we're half, I would say we're about a third of the way through. Fold these up. And I wouldn't worry if your soldering doesn't look exactly like this. We can always go back later and your instructor can help you resolder these connections just to make sure that they're correct. So I'm going a little bit faster than maybe than I would be if this was just a soldering course. But we want to see this thing work. So we'll put that part in. Now you notice I'm not specifying what direction any of these parts go in because the resistors, it doesn't matter. You have to read them in a certain direction, brown, black, blue. That means a 10 meg resistor, but it doesn't have to go in any specific way. Okay, I think we're done with the resistors. So now we're going to go on to some of the capacitors. And some of these capacitors are what's called polarized, which mean they have a plus and a minus. Now, in electronics, minus usually means negative, and that's denoted by a short line. So we'll just take a look at this capacitor right here. Or will we? Okay. See the short line there, the gold line in the middle of that black band? That's the negative side. We're going to look for that on every one of these. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be very similar. Okay, there's a line there with a dash in it. Okay, so what's our first capacitor? It's 10 microfarads, which is C1. All right, C1 is located. Let's see, where is it located? Somebody make these numbers smaller while I was on break? No, C1 is right there. All right, so C1 is the 10 microfarad capacitor. Let's look at these values. That's a 1 microfarad. This is the 10 microfarad capacitor. Now, again, we have a minus lead and we have a plus lead. Okay, and if you look at the circuit board up close here, there is a little line. Let's see, we're going to put that into C1. So if you look at this little line right here, it's hard to do this upside down. Okay, that's where see where C1 is right there? That's where the negative part of the capacitor goes, on that little line right in there. So let's do that. The radio won't work if you put these in backwards. These are some of the crucial components that will not work if you put it in backwards. So what I like to do is place the component, get ready to solder it, and then take a look at it to make sure I really have it in the right direction. Okay, there's that negative band on the capacitor, and there's that little line on the circuit board. So we'll fold those out a little and we'll solder that in place. Clean it, tin it, solder it. After a while, you can look at your solder connections. You can be very proud of them because they look nice. A good solder connection is like a work of art. It's just beautiful to look at. You'll know after the end of this kit whether any future soldering that you do is good or needs to be reworked. All right, so what's next on the list? C2, and that is a 1 microfarad. And there's one of these. And then there is also another one. So right here is C2 and C3. They're both 1 microfarad electrolytic capacitors. So if they're electrolytic, that means it has the black band. That means we need to put it in there in a certain direction. So let's go with C2. C2 is at the top of the board. On the left-hand side is the little line. Let's line that up with our component, place it in there, and again, just make sure that's in properly so we don't have to desolder it later. So let's go with that. Okay. These are shorter leads, but they can still go flying, so let's be careful. Okay, and then the other 1 microfarad is C3. Let's take a look for that. C3. That's, straighten that guy out. C3. C3. Who sees that? There it is. right there, in between those two resistors, C3, and the line is on the inside of the circuit board, so let's place our component there, observing the correct polarization. Now, I should stop and just say something. Some of these components do not have the exact same shape as what's on the board. It's not a problem. They do go in. These types of capacitors come in many different shapes and sizes. And for this kit, they chose this capacitor. It's very easy to solder in, but the symbol is not correct. What's important is that there's a black line here, and we place it in that, observing that polarity into the C3 slot. So in we go. I'm going to force those over a little bit. I'm going to bend those over. If you can see, I'm going to bend those over just slightly like I've done on the rest of them to hold that component in place, okay? I think I showed that before, but it makes it a lot easier. Whoop. See, I had a hard time tinning there. Making that connection. It didn't go right away because I didn't tin. Okay. By the way, see all these pieces? These are all the pieces that I've cut off, and those could potentially go flying off into your next door neighbor or to your associate you're working with there if we weren't careful about cutting those out. All right. Now we're really getting down to it. Let's see. We have one more capacitor left, and what's that? Let's see. C4, 5, one more electrolytic capacitor. That's the 100 microfarad. In my case, that's going to be the red one. And it has a white band with the minus symbol in it. So we're going to place that in observing the, let's see, what was that again? That was C5. Okay, so C5 goes over on the left side of the circuit board. Let's place that in. Now, sometimes the leads will be slightly longer, one lead or the other on a capacitor. That helps placing the parts in. But if you work at it, you can get it okay. All right, I'll tell you what. Let's do this real quick. Let's pull that out. Let's put it in the wrong way. Why did I do that? Because in my inspection, before I go to solder it, I'm going to look at that line on the bottom of the circuit board, and I'm going to say, where's the negative side of the capacitor? Oh, it's on the other side. That's wrong. Saved myself a lot of time there by actually just looking at what was going on the circuit board. So there it's in place. All right. Okay, next up is C8. If we take a look at C8 over here, let's see, is it C8? Excuse me, C6. It's going to be the blue one, a very small blue capacitor. So that's going to go into C6 position, which is right up here on the upper left, or the upper right of our circuit. This one's a little bit tough to put in, so be careful that you don't smash it in place. Okay, where's my solder? Here we go. We'll do these real quick. Okay. Good. Always got my finger over here to protect from that lead going off into the audience. All right, and the next item is going to be, let's see, this is the trimmer capacitor. So if you recall, that's the green tunable capacitor, which is right here. Whew, almost lost that. Some of these are really small parts. You got to be very careful. This is what we're going to use to tune the different channels that we can hear, the different frequencies. And there's a little tiny screwdriver that will fit into that slot. So there we go. So let's put that capacitor in, and that's C7. Only 2 leads. It doesn't matter which way it goes in. So we'll place that in. I think what I'm going to do to make things a little easier is to roll my solder back up again. And let's get that in position. Okay, great. Okay, good. By now, your solder connections should be looking pretty good. Okay. Well, now here's something that can happen. You see that? When I put that component in, the second lead did not go in through the hole. So we'll need to, we're going to need to pull that out again. Okay, since I messed up and put that capacitor in with one lead out, we have to clean those two solder holes out. So we're going to use something called a solder sucker, and what it really is a microscopic vacuum cleaner, which is going to vacuum up the solder. And I'll show you how that works. You may have one of these in your kit, and if you do, like I have one here, it's a good thing because, well, here goes. So you charge it, and if you can see, we'll just show you where I'm gonna pull the solder out of those two big holes, those two big piles there. So let's do that, and then I'll show you back again on the screen, on the larger screen. Okay, that's one. Okay. So now you can see, after it focuses, hello. Okay, that these two holes are open. You can see through them now. So I'm going to place the component in and move this along. All right, so this time I'll have to be a little bit more careful to make sure both leads came through, and this time they did. We'll go back and solder this. Clean, tin, and solder. Okay. All right, great, okay. That's in. All right, so that was the trimming capacitor. So now we want to put the diode in, okay? We didn't talk too much about the diode, but the diode is another component. This is a vital component. This is really what does all the work in making the audio. This rectifies the sound from in the air to making it into something that you can hear. So let's see where that goes, and that is diode 1. It's blue and black. Okay, and that needs to go in position D1. So let's look for position D1. And position D1 is, it's not, there we go, is right there. And you see this little line right here? That's where the little line on this has to go, the black line. This is made of a very small amount of glass, so let's be very careful when we bend these leads so we don't break the component. This is a very gentle component. And we'll make sure we have it in the correct direction. We do. Okay, push that down. Same deal. This component can easily fall out, so we're going to bend those leads away. And what do we have left? We have a couple capacitors. We have C8. Okay, C8 is marked with the 331. Hope you guys have better eyes than I do. My God, 331, but it's on there. So C8 is the 331. Yellow marked with 331. So we'll put that in. Okay. We're coming down to where the rubber meets the road. You see how I can't even pull that out of the soldering? I don't even think about it anymore. I think I'm probably out of the picture, okay. Okay. Okay, so we have C4 left, and that looks like one we should have put in earlier, but let's get it in there now. These components don't have to go in any specific order, but it's just easier to do the larger components first. All right, so let's place C4 in there. That's the 10 nanofarad. Okay. All right. Here's the trickiest component of all right here. This is the integrated circuit. This is the audio amplifier, the integrated circuit, and you can see there are 8 leads on this, which is specifically why I left it to the end, because it's much more difficult to solder. Now there's a mark. How do I know which way this goes in? There's 4 leads on each side. Well, there's a small mark here. If you can see it right here in the corner, which is a little circle. Let me get it up there a little closer. There's a little circle right here. I'll move that. Okay, that indicates a direction. And so what direction is that on the circuit board? Well, let's take a look at the circuit board a little closer. If you see this little U shape here, right here on the end, excuse me, which end is that on? Okay, right here on the end, that's where that little circle goes, that direction. So let's place that, and then we'll verify that it's okay. Now, something that can go wrong here is as you're placing that in the hole, these 8 leads are difficult to line up, so one might fold out or fold under. Let's give it a shot, making sure we have it in the right direction. You might need a little help with this one, because it is a difficult part to place. And boy, did I ever get lucky. Okay, let's take a look at that. You can see the leads there, right? All the leads that need to be soldered. But more importantly, is it in the right direction? Yes. So now we can solder it. Okay. This is what we built a lot of these kits at a local at the Hamvention in Florida, or Hamcation in Florida. And most of the problems were either one of two things. A component was put in backwards, which is why I stress that so much, or there were solder connections between those very tiny little pins, which is why we left that to last till you've actually soldered enough so your soldering skills are up to par. So now the last component, there's going to be the antenna, which is this green wire, and the battery plug, the battery cable. But this is the another important piece here, the inductor. Okay, it's going to be called, I think it's called L1, large bronze enameled coil, and that's this. Let's place that in. Now, you don't want to hold on to the end of this while you're soldering because it can get kind of warm. These are large connections, which will take a little bit more heat than we're used to using. So we might have to stay on them a little longer. So let's clean up, let's solder, let's tin up, and we'll go in and solder these. Okay. Even though they took a little bit longer to do, let's take a look at those. Look at the nice little fillet or Hershey's Kisses on there, the shape of that solder connection. So that's it. Well, no, that's not it. We have to put the antenna in. That's next. Little hole here marked antenna at the top. And probably a good thing to do would be to take all the strands of wire and round them off, make them nice and smooth so it fits through that little hole, because otherwise you could have a couple of strands laying around. Okay, so here we go. Tin it up. Okay, that's done. I'm not going to bother cutting the ends of these off. They're really too big for this, and it won't make any difference. And so the last thing we have to connect is the battery cable. There's a plus and a minus, right? Plus is red, minus is negative. So let's look for that. That's at the top here. We have two holes. One is labeled minus and one is labeled plus. So we'll put those two wires in. Put those in, and then we'll fold them over to keep them in place. You can see how they just fell out of there on me. Okay, fold them over a little bit, and we'll solder those in place. Beautiful. Okay. Okay. So what you have now should look a heck of a lot like this picture right here. The on-off switch, the antenna, plus and minus, the earbud connection, all the resistors and capacitors. So let's take a quick break. We'll pull out our little tuning arrangement here, a little tuning screwdriver, and we'll set up the FM modulator, the little FM station that we're going to have here receive, and see if we can hear it. Okay, welcome back. Now we're getting into the actual fun part of the program, and that is to see if this radio that we've constructed over the last hour actually works. So let's take out the battery and connect that. Make sure before you do that the radio is turned off by the on-off switch here. Give you a second to do that, and meanwhile I'm going to take my headphones out, my headphones here, and I got normally what I would do is I would take one headphone and listen to it myself, and I would give you, the builder, the other headphone, and you'd be able to listen to it. Well, you're not here, so what I'm going to do is connect it to my microphone, and you'll be able to hear the radio station that we're going to be able to, the radio station that we can hear. One other quick thing, let's make sure our surface is nice and clean so there's none of those little wires that are going to short anything out on the back of this receiver. And the other problem here is that, or not problem, but is that we're in a studio here and we don't have good reception from any radio stations. So what we have here is a little FM transmitter that's going to simulate what we would normally hear off the air, and we have a smartphone that's playing a piece of music called Carefree by Kevin MacLeod. So let's hook the headset up and see what we can hear. Here we go. So push the headset in. Make sure that you push it in all the way. There shouldn't be a whole bunch sticking out here like this. See this silver? It should go all the way in like that. Otherwise, it won't make connection. We have two controls on this radio. One is our volume control, the blue potentiometer, and the other is the station tuning. So I'm going to tune the station in. Okay, turn this on. Wow, it's already there. Normally I would be tuning this capacitor here. Well, let me let you take a listen to this. Okay, let me move it away from the transmitter now. And we have our volume control. We'll demonstrate that. Okay, turn it up. Actually, that's too loud for me to hear. It's that loud. All right. Tuning this can be a little bit critical, but we have a transmitter very close by. This tiny little, let's drop the music. This tiny little screwdriver, flat blade screwdriver, will fit inside that tuning capacitor, and you'll slowly rotate it to be able to hear the station tune in. I got really lucky, and it just happened to be there. Let's see if I can tune it. I'll tune it off, and now, well, let's see. Maybe I can tune it in by hand. Let's see if I can do this for you guys. Okay, you don't hear anything now. Okay, there we go. I think that works pretty well. That's it for today. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. Appreciate you hanging around till we finish this. W1VLF 73.